Muslim invasion of the United States. This is Son of Freedom. Purpose of this briefing: to assess the extent and threat of the invasion of the United States by Islamic actors, to begin to devise a strategy to resist and counter the Islamic invasion. Preliminaries. As of 2015, there are 3,153 mosques in the United States, as you can see on this map. That number is actually somewhat out of date now. Why is this number of mosques a threat? 3,153 mosques as of 2015 was up from about 2,100 in 2010. What is the problem here? Mosques are just Muslim churches, right? No, mosques are not mere Islamic churches. They are beachheads of Islamic civilization and eventually become garrisons, as we know from our experience in Europe. Islamic Doctrine of War 101, Cliff Notes version. Sacralization of lands. In Islamic doctrine, Allah is Lord over the earth, whether it is Islamic or not. The world is divided into two, the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb. The Dar al-Islam is the area that is controlled by Islam, and the Dar al-Harb is the region of war. The Dar al-Harb is in Jahiliyyah, or pre-Islamic ignorance, and in rebellion. Islam does not recognize non-Islamic governments. That means it does not recognize the U.S. Constitution. It is the duty of every Muslim on some level to participate in the transfer of all the earth from the Dar al-Harb to the Dar al-Islam. This means that it is the duty of every Muslim to work for the weakening and eventual overthrow of the Constitution and laws of the United States and replacement with the Sharia, Islamic law. I am talking about your country. In the Islamic worldview, men under non-Islamic governments are in bondage. That mere preaching is insufficient to free men from human governments. That is why jihad comes in. Doctrine of jihad. Islam is more an ideology than a religion. The religion is only a component of Islam. Islam is less interested in religious conversion than it is in sacralizing land. Classically, when a Muslim army approached a town, the inhabitants were given 2 or 3 choices. 1. Submit to Islam. 2. Become dhimmis, that is a subjugated population, and that was only available to people of the book. Or 3. The sword. Hijra, or migration, is a type of jihad. Originally, it was the mere migration by Muhammad and his companions from Mecca to Medina, but it evolved into a tactic of warfare. Quran 2.218 says that those who have emigrated for Allah's religion and have striven hard, meaning engaged in jihad, hope for Allah's mercy. So Muslims expect a reward from Allah from emigrating to infidel lands to take them for Allah. Jihad is on a continuum. It starts out with civilization jihad and then shades into kinetic jihad. When the Muslim has little power, he will outwardly be your friend. This is the doctrine of taqiyya. He will be ingratiating. He will court interfaith clerics, his useful idiots. Later, when he gains some power, he will demand accommodations, to revise textbooks to show Islam in a good light, demand prayer times during the workday, refuse to sell pork, tobacco, and porn, demand wudu stations at work, that's washing stations, demand Islam days at schools. Still later, he will get elected to office and implement hate speech laws prohibiting criticism of his prophet. He will install Sharia courts, create Islamic beachheads, multiply mosques and Islamic studies departments. Finally, he will run down people with bobtail trucks, do bombing attacks, knife attacks, shootings, torching churches, desecrating churches, converting churches into mosques, annihilate the culture of the target, then overthrow the government and install Sharia law. An example of this is the Iranian Revolution of 1979. See some before and after pics of Iran. Now we are in a position to appreciate the Kedar Yerushalmi study. The Kedar Yerushalmi study provided strong evidence that mosques overwhelmingly contain calls for violent jihad. Here's the reference. 51% of mosques had texts on site rated as severely advocating violent jihad against the infidel, and 30% had texts on site rated as moderately advocating violent jihad against the infidel. Therefore, 81% had texts on site rated as advocating violent jihad against the infidel. 19% had no violent texts at all. In 84.5% of the mosques, the imam recommended studying texts which advocated violent jihad against the infidel. If a mosque exhibited markers of Sharia compliance, then the leaders were more likely to recommend texts which taught violent jihad against the infidel. And when they talk about Sharia compliance, what they're talking about is if there were markers in the mosque that indicated Sharia compliance, like, for example, when the man would wear his wristwatch on the right wrist instead of the left, or men and women were segregated, or the imam, or let's say the men wore, like in the style of a Muslim, they would wear an untrimmed beard and either a very trimmed mustache or no mustache at all. If they wore a kufi, if they wore a robe instead of pants, instead of Western garb, these kinds of things. If they put henna in their beard, which is what Muhammad did, if they displayed these things, then there was more likely to be violent teaching against the infidel contained in that mosque. If a mosque displayed literature that advocated violent jihad toward the infidels, then the imam was more likely to invite guest speakers who also advocated violent jihad against the infidels. Obfuscating language. In Europe, there is a continual talk about radicalized mosques and radicalized Muslims. This communicates the false notion that violence is an aberration in Islam, the religion of peace. In fact, Islam itself doctrinally teaches violence. Jihad is an eternal command in Islam. Islam is always on the march. Muslims who are obedient to their texts will engage in civilization jihad until they can engage in kinetic jihad. If they are clever, their takeover of a country can be done with a minimum of physical violence. We are witnessing at present the takeover by civilization jihad of Sweden, United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, and France. At present, there are about 1,000 Islamic beachheads, also known as no-go zones, in Europe. These are enclaves in which it is unsafe for Westerners and even police to enter. They represent territory that has been captured by Islam or on European soil. Title 18, U.S. United States Code, Section 2381, treason. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Title 18 U.S.C. 2384, seditious conspiracy. If two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States, contrary to the authority thereof, they shall each be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. Title 18 U.S.C. 2385, advocating the overthrow of the government. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises, or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any state, territory, district, or possession thereof, or the government of any political subdivision therein, by force or violence, or by the assassination of any officer of any such government. Whoever with intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of any such government prints, publishes, edits, issues, circulates, sells, distributes, or publicly displays any written or printed matter advocating advising, or teaching the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying any government in the United States by force or violence, or attempts to do so, or whoever organizes or helps or attempts to organize any society, group, or assembly of persons who teach, advocate, or encourage the overthrow or destruction of any such government by force or violence, or becomes or is a member of or affiliates with any such society, group, or assembly of persons, knowing the purposes thereof, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both, and shall be ineligible for employment by the U.S. or any department or agency thereof for the 5 years next following his conviction. 18 U.S.C. 2385, advocating the overthrow of the government. In brief language, whoever teaches, prints and distributes literature, or recruits others to overthrow the government of the United States is guilty of this title. Do less than kinetic forms of jihad qualify? Yes, I believe so. Then why are Muslims not regularly charged with advocating? For example, an imam talks in Friday's sermon about replacing the government because it is contrary to Allah's law, or if a mosque displays literature advocating violent jihad, or when a Muslim society recruits subversives for civilization jihad, as with the Muslim Brotherhood, or CARE, or ICNA, or ISNA. Answer: 1. Islamic actors hide behind the freedom of speech clause of the First Amendment. 2. Our government is now compromised, or Ilhan Omar would have been arrested for running ballot harvesting in Little Mogadishu, or for marrying her brother to sponsor him into the United States. 3. If the imam does not explicitly advocate direct acts of violence, he has plausible deniability. Generally speaking, the U.S. has been so compromised by subversion that we are not enforcing our own laws, or enforcing them when it suits the left. Witness spotty prosecution of BLM and Antifa. Lessons learned from the non-enforcement of the sedition codes. The government's failure to rigorously and uniformly enforce the codes, coupled with Muslims skating on the edge of the codes by the use of taqiyya and abusing the First Amendment, means that we patriots are now on our own, except in the most egregious cases. It is likely that the DOJ will prosecute only when a militant group has plotted a terrorist attack and the FBI has the receipts. For less than kinetic forms of civilization jihad, we are probably on our own. This is why it is so important for Americans to become counter-jihadi warriors. This is truly where Reagan was right about freedom. The Muslim's fealty. Every Muslim has only one fealty: to Allah, the Apostle of Allah, to the Quran, and to the worldwide Islamic Ummah, or community. No obedient Muslim can give true fealty to a non-Islamic government. This means that when a Muslim American took his oath of naturalization, he was doing one of two things. He was either 1. Committing perjury, or 2. Committing apostasy. Probably less than 1% of Muslims use their naturalization ceremony as an occasion to renounce Islam. Therefore, more than 99% of Muslims who become naturalized citizens committed perjury and are actually stowaways, infiltrators. They retain their true fealty to the worldwide Islamic nation, the Ummah. Are you beginning to see the problem? Objection: not every Muslim is a terrorist. No, not every Muslim is a terrorist. Terrorism is jihad in its advanced stages, like what we are seeing in France and Sweden. Most Muslims, if they are obedient, are contributing on the level of civilization jihad. Some examples of civilization jihad: starting a Muslim Students Association at your university, being invited to and talking with elementary school kids about Islam on Islam Day at a school, but never telling the kids about the bad aspects of Islam or Sharia or Muhammad. Choosing a university major, which is a strategic location in society from which to conduct dawah, that is Islamic mission. For example, journalism, teaching, social science, humanities, Islamic studies, and history. Founding a mosque, giving to zakat, going online and conferring with your brothers in Islamic lands and seeking advice on how to conduct dawah. pressuring your local government to allow the muezzin, that is the call to prayer on the loudspeaker, pressuring an employer to excuse Muslims for prayer midday, to create a prayer room at the job site or install wudu stations at the job site, providing the local librarian with a list of books they need to purchase which will present a glowing picture of Islam, like the myth of the Andalusian paradise, and which downplays the history of jihad, which presents Islamic civilization as the source of Western civilization and even the source of science. What would the U.S. look like under the Sharia? For example, wife beatings are sanctioned, stoning for adultery, gays thrown off rooftops, Christians and Jews are dhimmis, that is, subjugated peoples under special rules, non-repentant atheists are beheaded, apostates are beheaded, girls have their clitoris cut out, vagina sewn shut except for a pee hole, no music, art, philosophy, comedy, poetry, honor killings of girls, husband chosen for girls, child marriage down to the age of 9, talaq, divorce. In other words, the man just says talaq, 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 and the divorce is final. It's very easy for Muslim men to divorce their wives, but the wife has to actually ask permission and pay off the husband. Polygamy, sex slaves are okay for jihadi warriors. Anti-science, anti-creativity, anti-critical thinking. Marital rape, women must wear the hijab or the chador or the niqab or the burqa. Women can only leave the house with husband's permission. Women may be discouraged from driving cars or going to university. No more democracy, liberalism, only human rights defined by the Sharia. Pray and bow to Mecca 5 times a day. Easy to be convicted of apostasy. Cannot question a prophet. Cannot express doubts. It would be a totalitarian society. Can you see the problem yet? I have a Muslim coworker or neighbor, and they are very nice. Islamic doctrine teaches the Muslim that under the doctrine of taqiyya, the Muslim may superficially appear to be your friend, but they are advised in their texts to despise you in their hearts. A less obedient Muslim may genuinely become a friend to a kafir, that is an infidel, but they are not supposed to do that. A good Muslim only has their true friends among members of the Ummah. This flows from the supremacism of Islam. In Islamic doctrine, the kafir is regarded on the level of feces. This is why the Muslim can and is commanded to kill the kafir when the time to demand fealty to Islam comes. How many Muslims are in the United States? About 3.35 million, or 1.1% of the U.S. population. Holy bleep! How did so many Muslims get into the United States? You can mostly thank former President Obama. He is probably a closet Muslim, judging from some of his statements to Muslim leaders. He threw the doors open wide to Muslim immigration. He is responsible for the countering violent extremism policy, which led to the scrubbing of national security documents and the firing of such truth tellers as Robert Spencer, Steve Coughlin, Phil Haney, and John Guandolo. He probably is responsible for Little Mogadishu and for the Islamizing of much of Michigan, like Hamtramck and Dearborn. What are the indicators of pending Muslim takeover? Frank Gaffney calls civilization jihad pre-violent jihad. Robert Spencer calls it stealth jihad. Well, one indicator is the location of Arab Americans. So I'm showing you some pages from a website that's called the Zip Atlas, and these are cities with the highest percentage of Arabs in the United States. Okay, so the highest one is Dearborn, Michigan. The population is 97,791 with 26.55% Arab. And then we go down, and I'm highlighting these cities which have substantial populations, and that compared to the percentage of Arabs gives a substantial number of Arabs. But we still don't know what percentage of Arabs are Muslim. We've got to keep that in the back of our mind. So let me just page down and show you some of these cities. See if some of these cities look familiar to you. So Fairview, New Jersey, Burbank, Illinois, Methuen, Massachusetts, West Roxbury, Massachusetts, Dedham, Massachusetts, Bayonne, New Jersey, etc., etc., etc. Falls Church, Virginia. Okay, quite a few. Now I'm showing you this page to show you that there were not 26,819 total records. Okay, that's 26,819 cities in which the percentage of Arabs were tabulated. Now I'm showing you this page because I want to show you the place that's colored in magenta and is circled, and that represents 771 cities that have 1 or more percent Muslim, not Muslim, but Arab. Okay, so 771 cities in the United States have 1% or more of Arabs. But this is not a direct indicator of Muslims. It is a proportion. If the data are accurate, only 24% of Arabs are Muslims in the U.S. This number seems low to me, and it needs corroboration from multiple sources, I think. Okay, but not all Arabs are Muslims, and not all Muslims are Arabs. All right, good point. According to U.S. Census Bureau data, 65% of Arabs in the United States are Christians, 24% are Muslims, and 10% are Baha'i or Druze. I am cynical about these numbers, and I must cross-check them. According to the Arab American Institute, there are 3.5 million Arab Americans, and Census Bureau data is lower than this. So the Arab American Institute might be inflating a little bit. If the above distribution of Arabs is accurate, it would mean that 3.5 million times 0.24 equals 840,000 Arabs are Muslims in the United States. All right, so keep that number in mind. If there are 3.35 million Muslims in the United States, then that would mean that there are 3.35 million minus 0.84 million, or 2.51 million Muslims in the U.S. who are non-Arab. Now, again, that number seems low to me. I'm not really comfortable with that number. I think that number 2.51 should be lower, and the number of Arab Muslims should be higher. But I have to do some additional research on that question. But those are the numbers that were given to me. Okay, so if we have that number 2.51 million Muslims who are non-Arab, then that would mean that they are sub-Saharan or Central or East Asian. Okay, that's where they have to come from if they are Muslim, most likely. Okay, so again, this distribution of the ethnicity of Muslims needs a check. This is interesting because in the Middle East, the percentage of Arabs who are Christians is 5%, and Muslim are 85%, and 10% others. So compare that to the second bullet, where according to U.S. Census data, 65% of Arabs in the United States are Christians. So how do we make sense of that? Well, this suggests that Arabs who have chosen to live in the U.S. may have fled oppressive political conditions they had experienced in the Middle East as a result of being Christian in a predominantly Muslim land. That would be the explanation. That I think would be the best explanation of why those distributions are flip-flopped from the Middle East to the United States. What would be a better indicator of civilization, jihad, and progress? Well, I think that the best indicator are mosques because, Muslims tend to overbuild in a residential area they have targeted, meaning they build before there's a large number of local Muslims. They can do this because there's foreign funding of mosques. Did you know that? A lot of that money is Saudi money. Islamic beachheads, also called no-go zones. These are Muslim ghettos which self-segregate, which are close to outsiders, in which it is unsafe for outsiders to go in which it is unsafe for police, EMTs, and firefighters to go in which there is a parallel economy, which will tend to have criminal gangs controlling territory, for example, Dearborn, Hamtramck, and Little Mogadishu. Lawfare by Islamic actors like CARE over alleged cases of discrimination against Muslims, or Islamic seminaries, for example, Zaytuna College in the Bay Area of San Francisco. I think it's in Berkeley. Islamic studies departments in universities. I have a previous video on this topic. And I also have a previous video on Zaytuna College. All right, so I think the best overall indicator, because lawfare is not as visible to the average person, Islamic seminaries, there aren't that many yet in the United States. Islamic beachheads, it's a very contested topic, and both parties to the contest, or both parties to the controversy, are arguing over whether they exist. But when you have a mosque sitting in your neighborhood with a parking lot and cars in it and people coming in and out, that's a pretty good indicator that you're being Islamized. All right, so we return to this first map, and this is kind of worrying. And notice California, Texas, and New York have a large number of mosques. Large number. It's very worrying. Especially, I'm surprised to see so many mosques in Texas. Very surprised. 302. Texas is the heart of the Bible Belt. Why would Texas allow this? And notice up in the upper high plains and the upper mountain states, they are very conservative. This is really the heart of the patriots in our country. Okay, this gives you a good indicator of the flavor of the country. Why are mosques a good indicator? Well, mosques are built in areas that are targeted by Muslim leaders. Mosques usually have madrasas associated with them. In unusual cases, mosques have seminaries associated with them. Mosques contain teaching in civilization jihad and kinetic jihad. I've watched footage of both. In the advanced stages, mosques are known in Europe to be garrisons and house weapons or explosives in preparation for kinetic jihad. So this is why I say mosques are garrisons. Planning takes place in mosques for the Islamization of the city and state of residence. A mosque is a visible testimony of Muslim intentions. How should Americans counter the Muslim invasion? Well, learn to refute Islam on your feet. Learn some basic facts about Islam to use in refuting it in school board meetings, zoning meetings, policy meetings, before your state lawmakers, and of course to deprogram individual mosques from their indoctrination, individual Muslims from their indoctrination. Learn how to explain to your city council what is contained in the Sharia law and why your city should not allow the building of a new mosque in your city. If Muslim imams are doing a radio program or newspaper article or interview in your city, voice a refutation of their position in a parallel program or newspaper article, etc. in your city. If Muslims are doing dawah, that is mission work in your city, pass out tracts and do open-air teaching to refute the tenets of Islam. Teach a refutation of Islam in your community college, adult school, or university as a lecturer. Learn to advise your state lawmakers on the dangers of Islam for your state. The federal government is already compromised. It is now just us. Have your state and federal lawmakers reclassify Islam as an ideology and declassify it as a religion proper. Stop Muslim immigration entirely. Denaturalize and deport Muslims if they engage in material acts which show false representation in their oath of naturalization. This is really important, because this can be a tool for exporting Muslims. Create a counter-jihadi think tank. Get a PhD in Islamic or Middle Eastern studies or Near Eastern languages and literatures, and create a career researching a revisionist account of early Islam. In other words, the standard narrative of early Islam is contained in the Sirah, which is contained in Ibn Ishaq or in Tabari's history. That's the standard narrative. But there's a new line of research now. An example of that research is Fander Films. Jay Smith, he has a series of films. And also there are other researchers who are working on this in presenting a counter-narrative and a counter-explanation for how early Islam evolved, which is a thorough refutation of Islam as it is believed by most Muslims. And so this can weaken the Islamic Empire. All right. Help law enforcement and the military understand the Islamic war doctrine and strategy. This is what John Guandolo does in his organization, understandingthethreat.com. Understanding the Threat. Go to their website and study what he's doing. Support him. And you law enforcement agencies need to invite him and have him give workshops to your law enforcement officers to recognize jihad when it is in your city or county. Become an expert in the intel on Islamic actors and tactics. Become an expert in fundamental data, which refutes Islam, contradictions in the Muslim sources, cases of borrowings from non-Muslim sources, testimonies from coins, inscriptions, geography, evolving Qibla, moral issues in Islamic doctrine and history. Christian churches should train their members how to refute Islam and how to recognize civilization jihad when it is in front of them. Christian churches and Christians should appear in front of mosques to pass out tracts that refute Islam and show that the Muslim is in bondage. In other words, we need to take a compassionate attitude toward Muslims. We don't hate Muslims. We see Muslims as in bondage to this demonic doctrine called Islam. They are in bondage, and they need to be freed from their bondage with the truth. Churches should have halfway houses for Muslims, just like you have halfway houses for drug addicts and alcoholics. You should have halfway houses for Muslims in which they can get intense and in-depth deprogramming from Islam for, say, a period of 3 to 6 months, where they would come in and actually sleep there and each night get some teaching that helps them to deprogram themselves from Islam and to replace Muhammad with Jesus Christ. Christian seminaries should have an MA or MDiv program in Muslim missions and not intercultural or interfaith drivel that weakens the church's militancy. By deprogramming and evangelizing the Muslim, the church can also save America from a revolution like what happened in Iran in 1979 and what is going to happen in Europe soon, Western Europe soon, if those 5 countries I told you don't pull it out of the fire soon. It is hoped that Americans become more aware of the danger facing us from Islam and take action. This is Son of Freedom. Thank you for listening.